Okay, so now we are live. I am going to try and update the Google Plus page. I'm Juline Chevalier. I'm the Curator of Education here at the Nasher, and I know we've got a couple minutes before we're supposed to officially start.
I'm going to.
And I'm going to turn off the background one. All right, so many things to edit. All right. So, Marshall, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Marshall Price. I'm the Nancy Hanks Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Nasher Museum of Art, and also the coordinating curator for Miro, the Experience of Seeing, an exhibition of paintings, sculpture, and drawings that is scheduled to open here at the Nasher in just a few days.
Excellent. All right, so hopefully all of the folks who were planning on watching or participating, I'm realizing that I had a little technical difficulty with the difference between the Hangout and the Hangout on Air, so hopefully everybody has shifted over to the Hangout on Air. I just posted a link, and hopefully I'm not frustrating too many people, but you guys are awesome for hanging with us. I'm going to check a couple of other things. Marshall, why don't you tell us a little bit while we're waiting for the last few minutes? Tell us a little bit about the installation of the exhibition, because that's just happened. Anything exciting or unusual about that?
Well, the installation, the exhibition itself comes from the Reina Sofia Museum in Spain. It was organized in conjunction with the Reina Sofia and the Seattle Art Museum, and was in Seattle just recently on view. The show itself is comprised of 51 works, and it will be, it is installed currently. We just finished the installation in one of our large pavilions. And
that's the Johnson Pavilion.
The Johnson Pavilion.
Marshall is one of our newest employees. We're so excited to have him on staff, and so still learning all the different named spaces at the Nasher.
Yes, there are many.
There are many. We're grateful to all of our donors.
So, so yeah, the installation actually is there were no hiccups along the way. It fit into the space. It's, I would say, probably a fairly large group of works to go into that space, but it fit nicely. There are several of Miro's sort of more monumental paintings that are over 100 inches high.
How many feet is that? That's super big.
Yes. Well, let's see. Not being proficient in math is one of the reasons why I'm an art historian.
Now, we should not continue that mythology that art and math do not go together. So we can.
No, that's.
But
that's
they're
true.
big. They're
true.
taller than us.
Very,
right?
very big. Oh yes, very
Okay.
big. Yeah.
So
yeah.
bigger than human size.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Was there anything that I know you had seen it in person in Seattle, but when you saw is there one of the artworks that you saw here and were like, oh wow, now I see it in a different way?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, every time you see an exhibition installed differently, you begin to see different relationships between the works in the exhibition. So, for example, you saw the exhibition in Seattle as well, and it's installed completely differently here. That's not always the case with exhibitions. I mean, sometimes if an exhibition travels, the curators may try and recreate or be as faithful to the original installation as possible. In this case, we didn't have quite the space that Seattle had, so
Marshall has worked miracles to fit artwork that was in, what, 3 times the space?
At least.
Into our gallery, so that's super exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, I guess since it is officially time, we'll go ahead and get started, and we will reintroduce ourselves. I'm Juline Chevalier. I'm the Curator of Education here at the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University.
And I'm Marshall Price. I'm the Nancy Hanks Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here at the Nasher, and also the coordinating curator of the exhibition Miro, the experience of seeing.
So we're going to get a brief introduction to Miro today. I am going to scoot out of the image and let Marshall take over, and then he's going to pull up some slides to give us a little background on Miro. We hope that this is a good introduction for anybody who's going to come and see the exhibition, because as I'm sure Marshall will point out, the exhibition focuses on the last 20 years of Miro's life. Before I go any further, though, I just wanted to mention that this is an experiment for us here at the Nasher to try out these Google Hangouts. So Marshall's a good sport he's new, we tricked him for trying this out with us. But these little kind of lunchtime sessions where you can get a little taste of an exhibition, maybe an artwork. So we've got a couple of others coming up. Wednesday, October 8th, also at 12:30. We're going to try and get either an iPad or a camera onto some wheels, and we're going to follow Marshall through the exhibition. So we'll get kind of a virtual walkthrough. And then on December 17th, also at 12:30, we'll do kind of a focus on a couple of artworks, so get really in-depth with those. All right, so I'm going to pull up actually Marshall's PowerPoint so that we get that. And all right, so now everybody should just be seeing the PowerPoint presentation, or just the slides. So Marshall, you can advance with the arrows.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, as we were saying, the exhibition is comprised of 51 works, all coming from the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, and all dating from the last 20 years of Miro's life. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to take a close look at the late career of one of the 20th century's great modern masters. So in this presentation, we really just want to take a look at how Miro goes from this adorable young man of around 1900 to the artist who created the works in the exhibition, the mature artist that he was at the time, and hopefully lend some context to the exhibition, because I think some people still have trouble sort of grasping some of the themes and subjects that are found in Miro's work. So Miro was born, Joan Miró, in Barcelona to a middle-class family. His father was a goldsmith and a jeweler. You can see on the map here where Barcelona is located in the northeastern region of Spain, also known as Catalonia. Here's a shot of a panorama of Barcelona with the Gaudí Cathedral in the foreground. And Barcelona was one of 3 geographical regions that played a tremendous role in Miro's development throughout his career, as we'll see. The second geographical region to which Miro really owed a great deal was the region of Mallorca. It's an island off the coast of Spain. Miro's mother was Mallorcan, and as a young boy he traveled there frequently on holiday with his family. And some of the earliest surviving artworks that we have by the artist are these drawings that you can see on the right here of the windmills of the Mallorcan countryside. The third geographical area that had a great impact on Miro, the artist, was Montroig, a hillside town, medieval town, south of Barcelona, where he lived beginning as a teenager. And we'll see very quickly that as the young artist develops, Montroig plays quite a role in terms of his visual development. On the left is an aerial photograph of the Montroig countryside, where we can see the agricultural rows of various plantings. And on the right is one of Miro's earliest mature paintings, titled Montroig, Vines and Olives. And you can see very clearly the connection, the visual connection, the aesthetic connection between Miro's sort of stylization of the landscape and the actual landscape on the left. In the early 1920s, Miro moves to Paris, the sort of center of the art world at that time, and becomes associated with the Surrealist movement. The Surrealists were a group of artists and writers who were interested in unlocking the unconscious areas of the mind to tap into an unfettered type of human creativity. Miro was associated with the Surrealists, but never really a card-carrying member of the club, if you will. He sort of kept them at arm's length. But it was around this time, and it was through his interaction with the Surrealist artists that he began to create this visual vocabulary. And this is a typical painting, the Hunter Catalan landscape, created by Miro in the 1920s. And you'll notice these small shapes, abstracted shapes and forms that he uses in the creation of his visual vocabulary.
And I'm just going to jump in, Marshall, please advance the slide, but I'm just noticing that sometimes there's a little bit of a lag between when you advance the slide and when it comes up.
I see.
For other people.
Okay.
So if anybody's having that problem, just be a little patient and we'll try and slow down those transitions as well.
Okay. And we're going to just jump ahead a little bit, somewhat like a cooking show. And by the 1930s, what we see happening in Miro's work is it's becoming quite dark and ominous. And that's really, I think, in response to several things. One is that Spain is in the midst of a civil war beginning in 1936 until 1939. And then by the late 30s, it's clear that Europe, that the specter of war is hanging over Europe and will soon descend on the continent. And so we can see in works like Nocturne a very dark sort of approach to the landscape. It's also around this time in the late 1930s that Miro begins to work in sculpture. And sculpture plays an enormous role in our exhibition, The Experience of Seeing. But sculpture was, in the 1960s, nothing new for Miro. It dates back to his days in Paris in the early 1930s and even into the late 1930s, as you can see with this assemblage sculpture, Sunset Object from 1937. Miro actually leaves Paris and moves to the countryside in Normandy to escape the coming German invasion. And it's there that he begins perhaps his most famous series, and also, I would say, the work for which he is perhaps best known, and that's the Constellation series. It's a series of fairly small gouache paintings that he began in the French countryside in 1940 and continued into 1941. When they were shown in New York, not long after they were finished, they were a great critical and commercial success. And while Miro had been exhibiting up until that point, they were sort of only further underscoring his international importance at that time. And here we see one of the later works from the Constellation series, The Day's Awakening, from 1941. But it's really after the war, and even after 1950, where our story begins, when Miro moves to the island of Majorca off the coast of Spain, and really begins on a journey that takes him to new creative heights. He moves into a brand new studio designed by his friend Josep Luis Sert, and for the first time in many decades, he's able to gather his body of work together and actually review it, reflect on it, and become inspired by it. One of the ironic things that happened, however, is that with his brand new studio, for the first time, this enormous studio, he has this great big space to work in, he decides to put painting aside for several years and focus primarily on ceramics and printmaking. From about 1956 to 1959 or so.
I'm just going to have you pause there for a second, Marshall, to let the slideshow catch up. Actually, hit the next one so that we can hopefully move on. But yeah, there's like a good 5 to 10 second delay.
I see that. Yeah. Well, I'll keep an eye on the delay, and just to make sure that I'm talking about the images that are in front of people's screens.
And it was kind of important that architect designed that space. He was and is very well known. Is that right?
He was yes. He's a very well known architect and a fellow Spaniard and a fellow Catalonian, if I'm not mistaken. He was for many years head of the architecture department at Harvard during the 1950s. And we'll probably touch on this in one of the later Hangout sessions, but he also designed the Spanish Pavilion at the World's Fair in 1937, and a number of other important buildings during his lifetime. So Miro moves full-time to Mallorca in the mid-1950s, installs himself in his new studio, and I think in some ways reconnects with the landscape. And here are two photographs of the artist during one of his walks on the beach, collecting objects, which he then will bring back into the studio and provide inspiration to him in the creation of sculpture. There were many aspects of the landscape that Miro engaged with. And coming up on the screen shortly will be several photographs of other aspects of the Majorcan landscape, the rustic Majorcan landscape, that really did inspire Miro. And when you see these images in context with his work, you begin to understand just where he derived his inspiration from. These were not photographs that Miro himself took. Most of these come from an art historian who visited Miro in the late 50s and wrote a book on Miro named Walter Erben. So we see the sort of reeds and the knotted olive tree, and also coming up on the screen will be a stone object from the landscape and a root or some sort of driftwood. And then as we advance through this, we'll see just how these objects in the landscape inspired the sculpture, much of the sculpture from beginning in the late 1960s that's included in the exhibition. It's just jumping ahead here. We've still got
big old delay.
The reeds, and there are the stone and the roots. And you begin to see as you move ahead, and maybe if I go through these a little bit more quickly, they will go more quickly on the be broadcast more quickly. Yeah, you begin to see there Bull's Head from 1970, one of Miro's very important works in the exhibition, and how similar in form it relates to this olive tree that Miro's friend, the art historian Walter Erben, saw in the countryside near his studio. Moving ahead, okay, let's see.
Technology, our best friend or worst enemy.
There we go, and this is another nice comparison, I think. It's again this Walter Erben photograph of some stone shapes in the landscape, juxtaposed with the Miro sculpture, and this root or piece of driftwood with this the largest sculpture in the exhibition, Miro, Woman, from 1968. Yeah. And you know, one of Miro's friends, Joan Prats, had this wonderful quote about Miro. He said, "When I pick up a stone, it is just a stone. When Miro picks up a stone, it is a Miro." And so we're moving ahead just slightly to this painting here, one of the earliest work in the exhibition from 1963, and we can see that there's a strong connection in the exhibition between painting and sculpture, and Miro worked across disciplines, but in very similar ways. And when you see the paintings and sculpture in dialogue with one another, you begin to see just how closely connected the two of them are. And so here we see person in front of a landscape from, as I said, from 1963, a very abstracted work, although not completely abstract. And in fact, Miro himself always said that his work was not abstract and rooted in representation. But what he does is he abstracts these forms. So we just have to look closely at them to discern the horizon line, the outline of a figure, and also use some of our imagination in terms of reading the work itself. The next work, Bird Woman 2, is part of a couple works that Miro, well, we're just going to jump ahead, just hold on, we're going to stick with, there we go, Bird Woman 2 from 1977 is one of two larger works in the exhibition, and also very closely related to sculpture, as you'll see in just a moment. The bird and the female figure were common themes for Miro throughout his life, beginning really at his earliest stages in the 19-teens. But here we see an emphasis on the dark outline and drawing, and also this strong connection with sculpture when the sculpture image does pop up here on the screen. And
while we're waiting for that, I'll just point out a feature to everybody that you may or may not have noticed. If you kind of mouse over to the left side of your Google Hangout window, you should see some icons available to you, and you should be able to find a Q&A box, or you should actually just be seeing the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. Anytime you have a question, a query, a comment, you can type in there and we can see it. And we may hold till the end of the presentation, but it's there.
And so you can see now in this comparison, well, that just changed, that there is this close connection between painting and sculpture. And this comparison is a really wonderful one to look at, because it's got really the painting in the exhibition that is maybe his most iconic from this period. It's an homage to his fellow Spaniard Picasso, and the title is Woman, Bird, and Star, Homage to Picasso, and it was finished on the day of Picasso's death, after which Miro dedicated it to his good friend and actually great inspiration to Miro, Pablo Picasso. In the exhibition, it's shown very closely with this sculpture figure from 1969, and you'll notice it in both works. The artist has taken a sort of collage-like approach to creating the works, and using collage in a sense to make both compositions. But just to return to Mallorca and Miro's childhood, and backtrack to illuminate his perhaps most important symbol that he uses throughout his career. As I said, Miro created a whole series of drawings of windmills in Mallorca as a young boy. And these windmills really begin to form the basis for Miro's most important and most often used visual vocabulary symbol of the star. And when you look at this over the course of his entire career, you can begin to see just how these early experiences led into the creation of Miro's visual vocabulary. On the left is a photograph of a typical windmill, and then now we're looking at two of Miro's other early drawings of windmills.
How old was he when he was doing
He was approximately 10 years old when he started doing this, and these are his earliest surviving works, these drawings of the Majorcan countryside. He also did drawings of the countryside without windmills in them, but you'll see that he begins to use and incorporate this star shape beginning in the 1920s with these very sparse abstract paintings that you see here. But as we move through, we can see in each decade how he's incorporating this star shape into his works. So by the 1930s, when the next slide comes up, we'll see that he's included them in the paintings. So we're just waiting for the next slide to come up here, and there it is. And even more abstract work from the late 1920s, this work 48, and then into the 1930s. And he uses the star in a number of different ways. He uses it there we go, and we have it as an actual star in some cases. We have it as a very abstract shape. On the left is a work from the 1930s, and on the right is another of his constellation series, one of which we saw earlier on, and again probably his best known series, and really his sort of best known period. Then in the 1950s, on the right, we can see there's a star in there.
over the white dot?
Over the white dot, and just above that figure's head, too, next to that moon, that crescent shape. And also into the 1960s, in a painting that looks very much like color field painting. And then finally, I think, yep, there we go, red circle star. From 1965, we see the star shape there in the upper left-hand corner, just above the orange circle shape. And then even into the 1970s, which we can see here, in a much more playful composition, this figure with arm raised and the star in the upper right corner. So the star is an important symbol for the artist for more than 50 years and used throughout in a number of different ways, really in a kind of poetic evocation of the celestial realm, the juxtaposition between the earthly realm and the celestial realm as well. And then finally, and to conclude with our images today, we come to one last image of the artist in his studio, surrounded by all of his late work. This was Miro toward the end of his life, a wonderful shot of the artist in his studio. And we're just going to click through 2 slides to show the image credits for the images that we've shown at this point, so we give everyone their proper credit.
You can always email us if there's ones you can't see and you're dying to know what an artwork is. Gone through those pictures.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's the last image credit page, right, which will appear shortly on your screen.
Awesome. So are there any thanks everybody for our technical challenges as we realized the delay. Thank you for your patience in that. And also I realized that I had a little mistake between Hangout and Hangout on Air, and so if there's anybody who's watching, every time you'll see a little flash of other people participating in the Hangout. If all of you who are watching but are not me or Marshall, if you could just mute yourselves, that would be great. That way, because Google is so smart that whenever you make a noise, it automatically goes to your screen. So that's why we were seeing little flashes, because people are clearing their throats or doing things that humans do to create noise. Are there any questions out there that folks would like to type into the question box?
There must be questions.
Well, I'll start out. What was one of the most surprising things that you learned about Miro in the process of this exhibition?
Well, I mean, I would say that, you know, Miro is one of these artists that everyone studies in graduate school to some degree, but it's always focused on that surrealist period of the 1920s and 30s. And this exhibition, and so, you know, when I started work on the exhibition, I sort of thought, oh boy, you know, here we go. I have to kind of be subjected to a modern master late in his life who, you know, maybe was resting on his laurels, because I was not familiar with the work at all. But I was so surprised at the quality and the continual desire to push the creative boundaries, that all of the work in the show is a complete revelation to me. So, I mean, that's been the biggest surprise, I would say.
Mm-hmm. What's here? I know it's like choosing children, but do you have a favorite or one that you keep going back to again and again?
Well, I mean, there is that iconic painting in the show. It's sort of the signature image. That's maybe one of his there we go. You know, one of his better known works from this period. The sculpture, though, as a complete body, was also a revelation, because I knew him as a painter, I knew him as a printmaker. I knew he did sculpture, but I didn't, you know, the late sculpture I knew was sort of that painted sculpture.
Very bright, primary colors.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, this work is not painted. It's patinated, which is very different. It has that bronze color, as you saw in the slideshow. And it's yeah, I mean, the sculpture in general was a complete surprise for me, really.
And so there's the exciting process of knowing that he cobbled all these things together, assemblage, with stuff that he found on the beach and in the trash, we can assume.
Yeah.
And then had it cast in bronze. So there's that extra step of challenge just because. Oh, and the fact that he also carved into the wax. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so most of the sculpture in the exhibition was created using the lost wax technique, which basically requires the artist to create a wax positive mold of the sculpture. And for Miro, this allowed him to incise into it, to draw into it, to add his hand to the object before it was cast permanently in bronze. And so even in the sculpture, you see him using this same visual vocabulary that I talked about before, of the star and other various shapes, repeated throughout the exhibition.
Awesome. Well, I'm sad nobody asked a question, but the presentation is out there. We hope you enjoyed it. We do also hope that you will come out. Oh, maybe there's in the chat version. We were looking. Oh, Jessica asked, is the exhibition open now? Will you remind us, Marshall, when it opens to the public?
The exhibition opens to the public this Sunday here in Durham, North Carolina, and that date is September 14th, I think.
15th, 14th, 14th. It's on the poster.
14th. 14th, right. And you all are extremely fortunate because the exhibition will be on view through February 22nd. So it's a very long run. It's the first time that this material has ever been shown in North Carolina, if not the entire southeastern region of this country. And it may be the only time that any of us get the chance to see all of this work from the Reina Sofia together in one place without going to Spain. Nice. So it's a great opportunity to see the work of this modern master.
A visit to Durham is much cheaper than a visit to Spain.
It is.
And we have excellent restaurants if you're visiting from out of town. So, well, thank you so much, Marshall. Really appreciate it, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it as well. Marshall has great information and such great images too. Reminder that we'll be back October 8th for a walkthrough. So join us for more fun technical explorations and that, where we're going to try and put the computer on wheels. It'll be a good time, right? It's an experiment.
Yes.
We're trying to be casual and fun with this. It's excellent. All right, so I hope everybody has a great day, and you can also check out the amazing website for the exhibition, nasher.duke.edu/ is that a slash or a backslash?
I think it's
backslash Miro, M-I-R-O.
Yeah.
So check out that website. It's beautiful. Got a lot of great information and images. So.
And supplemental information as well.
There we go. You can find out more.
Yeah.
All right. Should we wave goodbye? Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.